Oh, sorry, YouTube. Didn't see you there. This is Peter with you once again. Why don't you pull up a chair? We can talk for a second. So, anyway, right, here I was, sitting painting, watching YouTube videos, as I tend to do, and I saw a video by the user Genetically Modified Skeptic. Hello, Drew, if you ever watched this video. Now, Drew, Genetically Modified Skeptic, was talking about a video, what's this video called again? Why I, as an atheist, am no longer a humanist. And this video got me thinking, because I thought personally that there was a bit of a juxtaposition going on in the ideas in the video. Now, I guess this is one of those videos where I really have to say that I'm not really committed necessarily to what I'm about to say in this video. Or that's to say that what I'm about to say will probably start to trend a bit towards nihilism or relativism, and there are reasons that I'll go into that that's not exactly very, let's say, socially acceptable to do, and it's frowned upon intellectually as well. And yet, I think that it behooves you to at least contemplate different ideas. So take me as playing a bit of devil's advocate in this video. Now, the reason that he says he, as an atheist, can no longer consider himself a humanist, even though he sort of backpedals on that towards the end of the video. I saw what you did there, Drew. In the video, right, I guess the first piece of argument, he talks about science. He references Carl Sagan's pale blue dot and talks about the chapter in which there's human demotion. This idea that human beings, once upon a time, considered themselves to be the center of the universe. And then, through a series of realizations of how the universe is actually structured and the actual nature of sentient life and of all life on planet Earth, that humans had to take a big step down from what we thought we were as the masters of the universe, and the world and the universe being especially created for us. So that's sort of the first plank of what he's arguing. The second plank, he talks about a book called The Righteous Mind, which is definitely a book that I would recommend. I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, so forgive me. But the author also wrote an article that he referenced. In the book, The Righteous Mind, one of the core ideas is that he essentially argues, the author argues, that human moral judgments are not so much based on a careful series of going through moral reasoning and then basing moral judgments and actions on reasoning. Instead, he uses the idea of the elephant and the rider, that there's an elephant that makes very intuitive, snap moral judgments based on intuition, feeling, things that would not necessarily be considered rational. And then there's the rider, a level of the conscious mind that attempts to rationalize the moral decisions that the elephant, you call it subconscious processes or whatever you want to call it, has made. So, in other words, human beings often basically rationalize things after the fact rather than go through a deliberate, rational, moral process when coming to moral conclusions. Okay, fine and fine. Humans aren't the center of the universe. Human beings aren't rational. Okay, 100%, I'm on board. And then he goes on to talk about Peter Singer-style arguments, in which that if you want to be rationally consistent in moral judgments, then there aren't good reasons for excluding animals from human moral consideration. That the sorts of things that would differentiate human beings from animals would also separate children and people of different cognitive abilities and other things, and he doesn't want to go that far. So he can't find a rational way to delineate between the moral consideration of humans and only humans, or primarily humans, and also be able to rationally exclude animals from the sphere of moral consideration. I found this an interesting juxtaposition because it presupposes moral realism, that we can arrive at some sort of standard of morality through a process of reasoning, and that we want it to be rationally consistent, and thus rational consistency would mean that we also have to include animals in our sphere of moral consideration. That's all well and great if we want to continue down that particular path of moral realism and subjecting our moral worldview to a rigorous rationality. Let's put it that way. What I started to think are probably some dark thoughts. And I feel like, first of all, I have to explain my perspective on where I perceive Drew to be coming from. Genetically Modified Skeptic. So he's sort of this new breed of atheist. The new YouTube atheist. And watching his videos, to me, it reminds me of the ending of The Wire. I won't spoil the ending of The Wire for you if you've never seen it, but if you've seen the ending of The Wire, then you know what I'm talking about. But he's still at a phase in his life where he's invested in arguing against religious apologetics and confronting problems like, if there's no God or if you don't believe in God, then where do you get your morality from? Grappling with those kind of questions and attempting to provide answers for people on that count. And I understand perfectly because I've been there, or I understand reasonably well, if not perfectly. I've been there too. But here's the thing. What if we go back a step to the point where we realize that human morality isn't based on a deliberative, rational process, but is instead a series of instincts that we rationalize after the fact? It seems more in line, to me, again, just to my audience, I would definitely recommend the book, The Righteous Mind. But to me, that's more of what I got out of reading that book. That as much as we try and rationalize morality, it might be somewhat of a fool's errand. And if we can't necessarily completely create, even if we could, let me stop myself for a second, even if we could create a completely rational scheme to explain morality, in a sense, we would just be the rider, as to go with the metaphor that's used in the book, trying to explain the elephant. I doubt that if we were to come up with a perfectly rational, rationalized system of morality, that we would do very much to change the elephant. This is part of the reason that religious people, for as much as they like to toss around these accusations of, if you don't believe in God, where do you get your morality from? How come you don't just go murder and do all these other terrible things? And yet, think of every terrible thing that human beings are capable of doing. Okay? A religious person has done all of those things. Not every instance of those things, but every kind of those things. What you believe, ostensibly believe about religion and morality, has far less to do with how you actually behave than people would like to think. That's part of the reason that if I were to be confronted with questions of, like, where do you get your morality from, I would attempt to basically flip the conversation on its head, because I think that's the direction it would need to go. I think that these questions tend to look at things upside down and backwards, and that you're actually not doing yourself much of a service by playing into the way that they have framed things. You have to completely disrupt their script and their framing. That reminds me of another similar book that has to do with politics, and it's sort of very similar to The Righteous Mind, but it's not coming to me off the top of my head, that talks about framing and the way that discussions are framed. I think many of these theistic discussions that atheists who engage in counter-apologetics find themselves talking about, the best thing you could possibly do is find ways to break their frames, flip the script, turn things on their head, rather than engaging the way that they're framing the question at face value. But going back to the question of morality, within the, let's say, atheist counter-apologetics, you don't want to come off like a nihilist, because then you lose face. Then they seem to win. Rationalism and nihilism are things you want to steer clear of in debates against, apologists and religious folk, because it will make you look bad. So you have to lean into this idea that I do in fact have this completely rational schema for morality, based on reason and science and all these other things. But let's for a moment just step back from that. Let's let go of the rider of the elephant, who's trying to save face in a debate with apologists, and ask ourselves, where do these moral sentiments, the elephant, where does that come from? And why might that have led us to the sort of less than fully embracing of moral consideration of animals that most humans throughout time and history seem to possess? I'm going to say, for the sake of argument, that morality, in most regards, was a series of cognitive heuristics that human beings developed in order to get along with each other and function as a society. And that it's difficult, not impossible, but difficult for, given that's the what the elephant was built for, to sort of stretch the metaphor, for humans to then go from the elephant, which was based on having morality so humans can get along and function as social creatures, and they function as social creatures to further their chances of survival, to then pass that on to the rider, that then completely rationalizes or attempts to rationalize that system of morality and create something called, that would be considered a sphere of moral consideration, and then extend that to not only all humans, but all animals. I'm not saying, again, I want to clarify something here. I'm not saying or attempting to argue that animals are not worthy of moral consideration. That's not what I believe. And I'm trying, nor do I fully buy into completely, some sort of lame and poorly formed idea of evolutionary psychology. I don't want to go that far. Again, trying to play devil's advocate here. But given how the elephant was constructed, right, you could see why human beings would not only struggle with moral consideration of people outside of their own group, but for animals as well. They're not within the sphere. That's what people talk about, human beings being tribalistic all the time. But part of what that is a feeling that, for example, when you share a sense of morality and beliefs with another group, and they have the espousal and signification of certain beliefs and moral principles, then you feel as if you can trust that person. Because trust in a social setting is a huge part of how humans get along and cooperate with one another. And by cooperating with one another, we increase our chances of survival, our capacity for productivity. So part of the reason that theists are so quick to go to this moral route and cast moral aspersion on atheists is because by indicting the morality of atheists, they're trying to say, look, these people have abandoned moral precepts X, Y, and Z. Therefore, you can't really trust them. And atheists attempt to counter that and say, no, you can trust us because we follow morality for rational reasons. It's atheists have to go about this PR campaign of attempting to explain their own morality to extend trust or to get other people to trust atheists, because they're basically have been cast in the role as the other, as an outsider of society. And in most societies and in most civilizations, being an outsider in and of itself tends to exclude you from the sphere of moral consideration. So I guess the problem is even worse than it's depicted, because it's probably overly generous to think that we generally, the elephant, the gut moral reaction or moral intuition, considers all humans as equally worthy of moral consideration. I don't think that the average sphere of moral consideration even extends that far. It's really only a certain in-group, and they have to signify who's in the in-group through things like similarity of nationality, religion, sometimes skin color if you find the right group, tribe, etc. So when people engage in these, protestations of their morality and moral principles and their piety and all these other things, if we're to put on our, truth glasses, like in the movie They Live, when you've probably seen the memes where the guy puts on the sunglasses and then he sees the truth in things like advertising. You put on your truth glasses when somebody's declaring how moral they are, how spiritual they are. Oftentimes what you'll see is this, they're saying, trust me. I believe in XYZ, therefore I won't rob you, steal from you. And oftentimes the social display of saying those things is less a truth of who they are as a person and more engaging in a social game of trying to convey trust to other people. And people display affiliation with each other all the time in ways obvious and subtle. Like one time I was in Manhattan and I'm taking the subway. I was with my sister. We were going to a museum, and it was very weird because like half the people in the subway had Red Sox hats on, and half the people in the subway had Yankees hats on because it was going up towards the train was going up towards the Bronx, and obviously the Yankees were playing the Red Sox, and there was a couple there, and one had a like Red Sox gear on, and the other had Yankees gear on. I'm like, that's some weird stuff, man. Like, interfaith marriage, I believe is that what that'd be called. But anyway, that's not right either here or there. So you can't necessarily take people's declarations of their piety, their belief, their morality at face value. And often when they express it socially, it's basically saying, trust me. That's what they're really getting at. And so you have theists attempting to place atheists in a box and say you can't trust these people because they don't believe what we believe and they don't have morality, so they might do terrible things to you. They're capable of terrible things because they don't believe what we believe. Now obviously the conclusion I would draw from a book like The Righteous Mind is that has little to do with it. People are going to by and large behave how they're going to behave, and they're going to rationalize it after the fact. That's not universally true, but in many circumstances it really their espoused beliefs have less to do with their actual behavior and their moral reactions to things than they would like to believe. So atheists then have to engage, as I said, in this counter project of PR to say, no, we have this perfectly reasonable standards of morality, et cetera, et cetera. But again, what if you're just going through a series of not only one, the rationalizations of the writer, and number two, also engaging in the same social games of like, hey, just because I'm an atheist doesn't mean you can't trust me. I also won't murder you, won't rob you. So nihilism is a point of view, given those circumstances, or even relativism, is not really one that you want to espouse for social reasons. It's like if you're getting on a roller coaster, right? And you're wearing shorts because it's a hot day at the amusement park, and you realize that your wallet's kind of loose, and the roller coaster does loops, and you think, oh man, my wallet might fall out of my pocket while I'm on the roller coaster and it's flipping over. So who would you trust your wallet to? Would you trust it to a pastor or a self-espoused nihilist? Personally, it would really kind of depend on who the pastor was. Like if it was somebody like Joel Osteen, then probably the only thing I would trust him with is a live hand grenade on which I've just pulled the pin. But, really, again, this idea that we might consider morality in any other way than it's like we either believe in it for religious reasons and it's about God and these other things, or we have these perfectly rational reasons that we hold to at all times. The way that you put, about the righteous mind and these ideas of the elephant and the rider, it would suggest that maybe we shouldn't look at it at either of those ways. But that brings us into the dark, scary territory of relativism or nihilism. And we go, we don't want to go there. No, we can barely admit it to ourselves, let alone begin to admit it to other people. Because as I said, there are social consequences for signifying that somebody might not have a reason to trust you. And I think it's definitely worth considering. So I guess going forward, what does that mean for things like animals or the human bias towards themselves? Well, again, if we've developed moral instincts as a way for human beings to get along with each other, I think it's a bit more complicated than I'm saying in that synopsis. But let's say that that's sort of a very crude summary. then it would make sense that we don't give that our elephant, our moral intuitions, don't give animals the same consideration as other humans, or even more specifically, as other humans we see as within our own tribe or nation, or however we draw our moral sphere as other people. And that these attempts to rationalize it, completely rationalize our morality, might be something of an act of self-deception. I guess what really struck me about Drew's video was, rather than stop and examine the elephant, he chose to double down on the rider. How can we make the rider even more rational? How can we even more thoroughly go through all the stages of the rationalization of the rider? But I guess the good news is that in terms of moral reasoning, that we're best at making moral judgments not entirely controlled by the elephant when we have some degree of distance from the subject matter. So in the case of, say, eating meat, we are no longer a species that basically were omnivores living close to the brink of survival, who didn't necessarily have time to give moral consideration for the animals that they were killing for survival reasons. We have now gone beyond that, even though that's sort of how the circumstances under which we've evolved, we've gone beyond that. And we no longer are living in this survival mode in terms of food, at least those of us fortunate enough to be born in certain parts of the world. And so we can say, well, do I need to actually eat factory farmed meat? I mean, I personally can't wait for the day that all meat is just grown in a vat. I understand that will affect the livelihoods of certain people, but again, having a certain distance from the taking of animal life and just being on the consumer receiving end in the 21st century, it does give the necessary distance for the rider of the elephant to step back and say, hey, wait a minute, why am I actually doing this? It's very easy to say, who cares about animals? But again, the thing about the elephant in the metaphor is that it's about gut reactions, but those are in the moment. And when you go to the grocery store, when you're deciding what to eat, you have plenty of time for the rider to think about what the elephant is doing and why, and put checks on it. It's not that the elephant is real and the rider is fake. The rider of the elephant, the rational part of your mind that engages in moral decision making, is very much real and very much plays at least some part in the process. It's more that our immediate knee-jerk reactions are guided by the elephant. But in cases like eating meat, it doesn't need to be, because we in the 21st century people that go to grocery stores don't actually function in that way. We're not at like, oh my God, I'm so starving, I'm going to take my bow and go hunt a deer. That's not the way we actually operate. So, we don't have to go full nihilism. Who cares about animals? Slaughter them all, destroy the planet, or anything like that. But at the same time, again, I just saw the juxtaposition of this attempt to, like, on one hand acknowledging the irrational aspects of human morality, on the other hand trying to double down with this hyper rationality of morality. And I found that an interesting juxtaposition, and I wanted to play that devil's advocate in this situation. So anyway, I think I'm going to cut it off for here, unless I decide to say more things and then I go back and edit more into this video. Anyway, have a good whatever time it is. Hello to Drew. Keep up the good work.